The room went deathly quiet the instant he stepped inside, his presence sucking the air out of the space like a vacuum. No one knew his real name, but in the bustling heart of Koreatown, his shadow alone could choke the life out of any conversation, leaving only echoes of unease. Ji-hoon Kim, the feared pikeban boss hailing from the gritty streets of Busan, the one they whispered about as the Iron Ghost, a man whose reputation preceded him like a storm cloud. Gukbap House was no ordinary eatery. It was a haven for the powerful, where the steam from bubbling bowls of rice soup rose with calculated grace, and every patron's glance carried the weight of unspoken alliances. But tonight, as the side door creaked open with a slow, deliberate groan, the only rhythm left in the room was the frantic pulse echoing in every chest, pounding like war drums in the distance. Streetlights from Olympic Boulevard pierced through the foggy windows, casting long, jagged beams that glinted off his impeccably polished boots, before climbing up to lock onto that impassive mask of a face, features chiseled from years of calculated ruthlessness. Flanked by two enforcers, their bulky frames casting even longer shadows, their fingers twitching ever so slightly near concealed holsters, a subtle, unspoken promise that mistakes weren't just frowned upon, they were erased without a trace. Ji-hoon didn't bother glancing around the room. He didn't need to assert dominance through eye contact. He strode directly to the secluded corner booth, settled into the worn leather seat with the ease of someone who owned the very ground beneath him, pulled out his sleek black phone, and uttered the words that would change everything. His tone was low, unyielding, devoid of any warmth or inflection, like a blade drawn slowly from its sheath. Muljuseo. Just two words, simple on the surface, but they landed like a heavy blade in the dark, slicing through the ambient chatter and leaving a wound of silence. Marcus, the black floor manager, with years of experience navigating tense crowds, felt his throat tighten instantly, a cold knot forming in his gut. Beads of sweat began to trace slow, deliberate paths down his neckline, soaking into his crisp collar. He'd handled tough customers before, drunken businessmen, rowdy groups, but never one whose mere presence could turn laughter into a funeral dirge, whose aura demanded obedience without a single raised voice. A nervous busboy, barely out of his teens, stammered out, "Sir, English, please." And in that split second, the air in the room crystallized, turning thick and brittle like glass on the verge of shattering. A spoon clattered to the floor from a nearby table, its metallic ring echoing unnaturally loud, like a gunshot muffled in a crowded library. Ji-hoon's eyes lifted slowly, cold as winter steel forged in the fires of unforgiving streets, and he repeated the phrase, quieter this time but fiercer, each syllable sharpened to a point. Muljuseo. The silence that followed swallowed the entire room whole, wrapping around every diner like a suffocating blanket. At the far edge of the counter, partially obscured by stacks of steaming bowls, a young black woman stood motionless, her uniform apron tied neatly around her waist. Sierra Washington, 28 years old, working the evening shift as a waitress, scraping by on tips and overtime to cover her younger sister's mounting college tuition bills that seemed to grow like weeds in cracked concrete. No one in the restaurant could pinpoint exactly when she'd joined the staff at Gukbap House. She blended in seamlessly, like the faded wallpaper on the walls, always efficient, always unobtrusive. But Sierra knew every single syllable he'd spoken. The words resonated in her mind like a familiar melody. She'd picked up Korean from her elderly neighbor back in the apartment complex, Mrs. Lee Soo-jin, a kind soul who'd once said with a wise, wrinkled smile, "Words are the invisible bridge to someone's heart. Cross it, and you connect worlds." Now, as Sierra scanned the terrified faces around her, diners frozen mid-bite, staff exchanging panicked glances, she saw how fear had turned everyone into statues, treating terror like a sacred vow they dared not break. Sierra drew a deep, steadying breath, her fingers tightening around the edge of the counter. She knew precisely what he meant, the request hanging in the air like an unsolved riddle, and she knew deep in her bones that speaking up now would shatter her carefully constructed world forever, pulling her into a current she might not escape. They say some choices are so tiny, so seemingly insignificant, that they rewrite your entire fate without a single warning bell. She grabbed a chilled pitcher from the cooler, poured a tall glass of water with hands that barely trembled, and started walking toward him, her steps measured but resolute. The fluorescent glow from the overhead lights traced her determined features, highlighting the resolve in her eyes, then shifted to illuminate his stoic expression. Two universes, divided by culture, power, and circumstance, crashing together in the hazy atmosphere of the restaurant. "Here's your water," she said evenly, her voice cutting through the tension like a calm breeze, then switching seamlessly to flawless Korean. "Mul imnida." A shocked murmur rippled through the room like a sudden burst of electricity, whispers bouncing off the walls. Ji-hoon's piercing stare met hers directly for the first time, and for a fleeting instant the iron ghost seemed to glimpse a reflection of his own hidden, long-buried self, a vulnerability he hadn't allowed anyone to see in years. If your heart's pounding right now, if you're leaning in closer to catch every detail, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell because this storm is just starting to brew. Things are about to get even more intense. Sierra Washington had mastered the art of fading into the background long before the sounds of Korean ever rolled off her tongue with such natural ease. Every single night at Gukbap House was a meticulous lesson in self-erasure. Back held straight like a soldier at attention, gaze averted to avoid drawing unwanted notice, responses clipped to the barest whispers that conveyed politeness without invitation. When demanding patrons barked their orders across the crowded floor, she glided through the chaos like mist rolling over a calm lake, unseen yet essential. When they griped about the spice level or the wait time, she nodded with a practiced smile, as if she'd been born to absorb complaints without letting them touch her core. Poised, unflappable, unbreakable in her quiet strength. Customers noticed her impeccable service, the way plates arrived hot and drinks refilled without prompting, but they never truly saw her spirit, her face blending into the background noise of the bustling eatery. But tonight, something deep within her, a spark of defiance perhaps, or an unyielding sense of justice, refused to dim or hide any longer. The way Ji-hoon Kim's command hung in the air, untranslated and unspoken by anyone else, felt like a personal call meant solely for her ears, a challenge draped in mystery. Mul juseo. She'd learned that simple phrase, along with so much more, from Mrs. Lee Soo-jin, her apartment neighbor whose warm kitchen had been a sanctuary during tough times, filled with the aroma of fermenting cabbage and heartfelt stories. Mrs. Lee had drilled it into her during those long afternoons of kimchi-making sessions, her hands moving with rhythmic precision as she explained, "Sierra, water binds us all. No borders, no barriers. We all thirst the same way, and acknowledging that builds trust." Then, one foggy dawn that Sierra would never forget, Mrs. Lee was suddenly gone, claimed by a swift heart attack on the busy stretch of Vermont Avenue, leaving behind only echoes of laughter and a void that ached like an open wound. Sierra hadn't uttered those Korean words since that day, burying them alongside the grief. Now, amid the oppressive buzz of fear and the harsh hum of fluorescent lights flickering overhead, they surged back unbidden, flooding her mind with vivid memories. She pictured Mrs. Lee's faded recipe book, still tucked safely in her locker at the back of the restaurant, its pages filled with intricate Hangul doodles, phonetic guides scribbled in the margins, and the gentle voice that once chuckled with affection. "You're sharper with my words than I am with yours. You have a gift for bridging gaps." Marcus, her manager and a protective figure who'd seen too many close calls in this line of work, shot her a desperate glance from across the room, his eyes wide and pleading for her to back off, to let the moment pass unnoticed. His whole body language screamed a silent warning. Stay out of it, don't draw his fire. But Sierra's heartbeat had already synced to a force far beyond mere dread, something profound, like destiny calling her name, urging her forward despite the risks. She raised her chin defiantly, locked her eyes with the man no one else dared even approach, and stated firmly, just audible enough for the nearest cook to overhear, amid the stifled breaths, "He wants water." The declaration struck the room like thunder, wrapped in the softest silk, reverberating through the space and causing a chain reaction of surprise. Necks craned in disbelief. A diner paused mid-bite with a spoon hovering forgotten. Utensils froze in mid-air as if time itself had stuttered. Even the rhythmic hum of the kitchen's exhaust fan seemed to falter, holding its breath in anticipation. Marcus mouthed across the distance, his lips forming the words with exaggerated clarity, "You speak Korean." But she ignored him completely, simply dipping her head once, confident, unyielding, a quiet assertion of her capability. Across the hazy, steam-filled dining room, Ji-hoon's focus sharpened like a blade being honed, his dark eyes narrowing in intrigue. No grin cracked his stern facade, but his posture eased ever so slightly, like a wolf in the wild spotting an enigma amid the familiar pack, something worthy of closer inspection. For the first time that fateful evening, the oppressive quiet wasn't solely his domain to command. It had shifted, belonging now to her, the unassuming waitress who dared to break it. And in a single transformative blink, the unseen, overlooked server became the sole voice that could pierce the iron ghost's impenetrable veil, turning the tide of the night. The hush that blanketed the room shattered, not with her words echoing further, but with the deliberate scrape of wood on tiled floor as he pushed his chair back slightly. "Sit." The order was delivered soft, almost conversational, yet it boomed through the space like an unchallengeable decree from on high. Heads whipped around in unison, the collective tension coiling even tighter, like a spring wound to its breaking point. Sierra halted abruptly in her tracks, her pitcher still held steady despite the subtle quake rippling through her veins, adrenaline surging like electricity. She met his gaze head-on, unflinching, taking in the full measure of him for the first time. Ji-hoon Kim, the enigmatic figure who could hush an entire street with nothing more than a nod, now studied her with the cold precision of a seasoned hunter sizing up unexpected prey and the serene calm of a sage contemplating a profound riddle. "Sir, I'm on duty," she replied steadily, her voice carrying a firmness that surprised even her, refusing to waver under the weight of his stare. "Sit," he echoed without missing a beat, his eyes unblinking, locked onto hers like lasers. "Not optional, it's a command." Marcus, from his vantage at the bar, signaled a frantic no with wide eyes and a subtle shake of his head, his face a mask of raw panic, as if willing her to retreat. The other staff members melted back into the shadows like receding ocean tides before a storm, leaving her isolated in the spotlight. Sierra's instincts roared inside her, a primal scream to flee, to blend back into anonymity. But those eyes of his, shadowed and shattered like fractured obsidian, infinite in their depth, anchored her in place, drawing her in against her better judgment. Deliberately, almost defiantly, she eased into the seat opposite him, the booth creaking softly under her weight. For a long, suspended beat, silence reigned supreme between them, thick and charged. Just the distant sizzle of grills in the kitchen, the rhythmic drip of a leaky faucet echoing like a metronome in the void between their worlds. Then, breaking the impasse, Ji-hoon switched to his broken, heavily accented English, the words coming out deliberate and probing. "Why?" Sierra paused, blinking in momentary confusion. Why what? Why speak my tongue? She weighed the question carefully. The raw honesty behind her answer felt too fragile, too personal for this den of shadows and secrets. But she shared it anyway, her voice steady as she laid bare a piece of her soul. "My neighbor was Korean back in the old building, Mrs. Lee Soo-jin, a widow with stories that could fill books. She taught me the essentials during our cooking sessions, then urged me to dive deeper, to immerse myself. She always said, grasping another's speech isn't just words. It shows you how to truly hear, to empathize across divides." Ji-hoon's face remained as impassive as stone, but his scrutiny deepened noticeably, peeling away invisible veils she hadn't even realized she wore, exposing layers of her resolve. "She passed away 2 years ago," Sierra added, her voice catching slightly on the memory, the pain still fresh like a scar that hadn't fully healed. "Sudden illness, a heart that gave out too soon. I kept studying after that. It kept her close, like echoes in the wind, a way to honor what she gave me." One of his enforcers shifted uncomfortably in the periphery, a subtle movement that spoke volumes, but Ji-hoon remained statue still, unmoving. His fist tightened subtly on the table's edge, a barely perceptible clench that betrayed a flicker of genuine mortality beneath the armor. "Busan," he murmured after a pause, his voice dropping to a near whisper, laden with unspoken history. Sierra's breath hitched in her chest, surprise widening her eyes. "Yes." "How did you know?" He averted his eyes for the first time, gazing into the middle distance as if seeing ghosts. "Knew someone from there. Same crowded streets, same tragic end. cut short by fate's cruel hand. In that brief flash, the iron facade cracked wide open, revealing sorrow underneath, jagged and ancient, seeping through like blood from an old wound that never quite closed. Sierra sensed it immediately, an empathetic warmth stirring within her, bridging the chasm between them. They fell quiet again, the silence transforming into its own unique dialect, a shared language of phantoms from the past, unspoken oaths, and the tenuous, fragile thread linking two strangers who, by all logic, weren't meant to connect on such a profound level. And in that electric humming void, Ji-hoon grasped something more unnerving than any rival or threat he'd ever faced. For ages, no one had truly conversed with him. They'd only cowered in fear, speaking at him like he was a monument rather than a man. The exchange snapped shut as abruptly as it had ignited, the moment fracturing like brittle glass under pressure. Ji-hoon rose from his seat with calculated grace, the booth creaking a final sigh under his shifting weight. Wordlessly, without fanfare, he drew from the inner pocket of his tailored jacket a crisp wad of bills, stacking them neatly beside the pristine glass of water that remained untouched, a symbol of the unexpected connection. The cash shimmered faintly in the restaurant's low ambient light, a sum that easily eclipsed her monthly wage, and then some, speaking volumes without a single word. He stood fluid and precise, his movements economical, betraying no emotion. One of his enforcers leaned in close, muttering something urgent in rapid Korean under his breath. Ji-hoon ignored it entirely, his focus unwavering. He spared her one final look, just one, his eyes harboring a complex tangle of mandate, intrigue, and peril, all woven tightly together like threads in a noose. He spoke only 4 words, resonant and hushed, delivered like an irrevocable decree. Next time, you alone. Then, without another glance, he turned and vanished into the night. The door sealed behind him with a whisper so absolute it felt almost ritualistic, a ceremonial closing of one chapter and the ominous opening of another. The enforcers trailed closely, their imposing forms devoured by the encroaching darkness outside, leaving only the faint scent of expensive cologne lingering in their wake. For what felt like endless, stretched-out moments, Gukbap House held its collective breath, the room suspended in a vacuum of shock. Then gradually noise crept back in like a hesitant tide, the clinks of bowls being set down, a suppressed sigh here, a stifled murmur there. The atmosphere eased incrementally, tension bleeding out, but Sierra couldn't join in the relief. Her mind was a whirlwind. She eyed the imposing stack of bills on the lacquered wood surface, the beads of condensation trailing slowly down the glass like tears, and the empty void he'd carved out in the booth like a magnetic pull she couldn't ignore. Marcus materialized beside her in an instant, his face ashen and drawn like porcelain about to crack. "What did he tell you exactly?" he demanded in a hoarse whisper. Sierra swallowed hard, her throat dry as sandpaper. "He wants only me serving him next time." Marcus's tone fractured with worry. "You alone?" she affirmed with a nod, her voice steady despite the inner turmoil. "Damn, Sierra," he breathed out, scrubbing a hand over his weary face in frustration. "You get what that implies? That guy's not just requesting service, he's claiming territory. You're no longer just staff to him. You're his fixation, a piece on his board." She blinked in disbelief, trying to process. "I just helped with a simple request." Marcus leaned in closer, his voice urgent and low like a conspirator's. His gaze doesn't let go once it's locked on. "I've witnessed it from afar. People get pulled in, and they don't come out the same." The warning lingered between them like thick fog, heavy and obscuring. Sierra glanced at the bills anew, her mind racing. It wasn't mere payment. It was a brand, a possession stamped on her life. She tried to convince herself it was routine, just another eccentric patron, another grueling evening shift. But as she cleared the spot with mechanical efficiency, her reflection rippled, distorted in the glass, her eyes wide with unspoken questions, her breaths coming in uneven, shallow bursts. Through the smudged pane of the window, taillights flared briefly in the distance, a dark SUV with shaded windows, lingering just long enough to mark her presence before melting seamlessly into the relentless downpour. And for the first time that night, Sierra truly understood. This wasn't a token of thanks. It was an invocation, a summons into depths unknown. She'd been selected, or perhaps ensnared, in a web far larger than she could fathom. The phone hummed insistently at 3:04 a.m., its vibration cutting through the stillness like a knife. Sierra stirred in the oppressive gloom of her small apartment, groggy from fragmented sleep, visions of flickering street glow and unyielding steel eyes fading slowly from her mind's eye. She reached for it blindly on the nightstand, bracing herself for yet another urgent bill notification from the college fund that loomed like a constant shadow over her life. But as the display ignited with a harsh blue light, her lungs seized up in shock, the air freezing in her chest. Tuition account. Cleared in full, every last cent. Her finger stalled mid-air, numb with disbelief. She stared at the screen, refreshed the page frantically, watching as the figure she'd etched painfully into her memory, $48,000 of crushing debt, vanished as if it had never existed at all, wiped clean like chalk from a board. Her younger sister's burden, the unrelenting anchor that had dragged her down for endless months, was suddenly inexplicably released. Then, as if to confirm the surreal turn, came the text. From an anonymous sender. No emojis or flourishes, no identifying mark. Just a message wrapped like a velvet-sheathed dagger, elegant yet deadly. For the interpretation. J.K. Sierra bolted upright in bed, her pulse thundering in her skull like a runaway train, the sound drowning out everything else. The flat was utterly mute, save for the low, monotonous drone of the ancient fridge in the kitchen, and the erratic racing of her heart, each beat a hammer strike. She scanned the message over and over until the letters began to swim and blur before her eyes. She murmured to the empty void of her room, her voice barely above a whisper, "No, you couldn't have done this." The device tumbled from her loosening grip, thudding softly onto the worn laminate floor. She snatched it back up immediately, her fingers hunting desperately for a response path, a way to reply or trace it. But it was blocked, sealed off completely, a dead end designed to prevent any backlash. Dawn's first light found her arriving at Gukbap House earlier than usual, her shaky hands clutching a styrofoam cup of cheap coffee that had gone cold long ago. Marcus clocked her presence before the morning rush even began, his brow furrowing in concern. "You look absolutely wrecked, like you haven't slept a wink," he said, his tone a careful mix of genuine worry and subtle probing. Sierra thrust the phone toward him silently, her expression speaking volumes. He absorbed the text on the screen, his eyes widening. Then he petrified in place, frozen like a statue. For the interpretation he echoed slowly, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial hiss that barely carried. "Lord, what does it even signify? This isn't normal." Sierra queried him directly, though her intuition was already screaming the answer loud and clear. Marcus blew out a sharp, exasperated breath, running a hand through his hair. "It signifies you're his now, caught in his orbit." She recoiled visibly, a flinch of denial. "He doesn't purchase items or services like some businessman, Sierra. He amasses souls, debts, unbreakable vows, layers of hush that keep people loyal. You see this as pure benevolence." He shook his head emphatically, his eyes dark with experience. "That's his classic snare, the way he builds and maintains his vast empire, through favors masked as unexpected grace, strings attached invisibly, but ironclad." Sierra gaped at her screen, her throat parched and tight like she'd swallowed sand. "I could try to refund it somehow, pay it back in installments." Marcus's chuckle was bitter, entirely devoid of humor, a short bark that echoed hollowly. "Can't reimburse a Spectre, kid. That's not how this works. That wire transfer came from the ether, some untraceable account, and the loop's already closed tight. If you push back, try to return it. You'll just remind him that you're still very much in play, a loose end he might decide to tie up." Outside the restaurant's fogged windows, a light drizzle began to patter against the glass, each droplet tracing erratic paths downward like grains of sand, slipping through an hourglass, time itself running out. Her sister's hard-won liberty had been purchased at a steep, unspoken price, but the invoice was scripted in crimson ink she hadn't spilled. Yet. Some boons, she learned in that moment of clarity, don't liberate you from chains. They forge new ones, binding you tighter than before. The initial ping from the unknown number arrived well past midnight, cutting through the silence of her apartment like an intruder. Unknown contact. Awake? Sierra eyed the luminous screen warily, the small space bathed in its eerie sapphire glow, casting long shadows on the walls. She paused for a long moment, her thumb suspended over the keyboard in hesitation, weighing the risks. Then, against her better judgment, she typed back, "Barely now." The response dots danced immediately, pulsing like a heartbeat. "JK, mind won't quiet down tonight." She quirked a lip in faint amusement, a small crack in her tension. "Try counting your worries instead of sheep. Might tire you out faster." The delay stretched out this time, long enough for her to second-guess and think he'd ended the exchange. Then, "JK, worries only for the frail. I don't indulge." She nearly chuckled aloud, her fingers poised and ready. "So there's no regrets in your long ledger? Nothing you'd undo?" Another lingering pause, the screen's glow reflecting in her eyes. "JK, constantly haunting me. Perhaps frailty's creeping in after all." The raw admission struck her deeper than it should have, resonating like a shared secret. Beyond her window, the metropolis thrummed with its eternal insomnia. Distant wails of sirens piercing the night, far-off rumble of traffic like thunder on the horizon, a street lamp outside stuttering as if it couldn't decide whether to stay lit or give up. Sierra hugged her knees to her chest for comfort, the thin quilt draped around her shoulders like a futile shield against the encroaching unknown. Why confide something so personal in me, of all people? JK. Because you bothered to reply, to engage. Its stark simplicity knotted her throat, a lump forming that she swallowed down. They eased into the conversation tentatively at first, words trickling like a slow stream, then building to a fluid rhythm like long-lost kin reconnecting after years apart. He queried her about her top Korean term, the one that stuck with her most. She countered by asking what he yearned for most from his Busan days, the fragments of home he carried. JK. The relentless crash of waves on Haeundae Beach at dusk, the salt in the air. Irreplaceable like the sea's own sigh breathing life into the world. Sierra. I yearn for Mrs. Lee's presence most. Her stories wove through our days like that very surf when we cooked together. It irked me back then, the constant chatter, until the silence hit like a wall after she was gone. JK. Tales and voices always precede the void. They linger longest in absence. The dialogue turned jagged and raw, delving deeper as they dissected themes of isolation, like skilled medics probing mutual scars they couldn't fully mend, but could at least acknowledge. Sierra found herself anticipating each incoming buzz, with a mix of dread and excitement, each new revelation peeling back another layer. Then, inevitably, it came. The pivot. JK. Post-shift tomorrow night. Let me reveal my true self to you. No more masks. She reread the words twice, her tempo rising with her pulse. Gut instinct screamed no, run, but a bolder, more reckless voice deep within whispered yes, urging her toward the edge. Sierra. That sounds incredibly risky, like stepping into fire. JK. Indeed it is. Life's edges always are. Sierra. Then why choose me for this? JK. Because when you looked at me that night, you saw past the ghost everyone fears. You saw the soul buried underneath. The man I forgot existed. She fixated on those words until they blurred in her vision, the steady sound of rain tapping insistently on her windowsill like nature's own Morse code. Across the sprawling city, in some hidden lair, the terror of many was messaging her anew, vulnerability seeping through. JK. Rest easy tonight, Sierra. Tomorrow the veils finally drop, and we see what's real. The dark sedan idled ominously, where the narrow alley met the relentless storm, rain sheeting down like a curtain. No muscle flanking him this time, just Ji-hoon alone at the helm, his sharp profile etched in stark relief by the soft dash gleam reflecting off wet pavement. Enter, he murmured through the cracked window, his voice less a command than an inevitability, laced with quiet intensity. Sierra wavered for only a heartbeat, rain soaking her hair, before sliding in, the latch sealed behind her with a definitive snick, the sort that echoes like a pact being forged in the dead of night. The urban landscape blurred past in vibrant streaks of emerald neon and scarlet taillights, the wipers swishing rhythmically as they veered toward the desolate warehouse zone on the city's fringes. where street lamps waned like expiring suns, flickering their last. An abrupt swivel down a side road, past a rusted iron barrier that creaked open at a remote signal, followed by a quick beam scan that lit the interior green. Then descent into the abyss via a hidden ramp, the elevator whir dropping her stomach like a stone, plummeting into darkness. When the doors finally parted with a hydraulic hiss, the air shifted dramatically, chillier, denser, laced with the metallic tang of steel and the faint buzz of static electricity from hidden machinery. The expanse that unfolded before her defied anything from a simple diner's realm. It was a labyrinth of cement halls aglow in pulsing crimson alerts, suited figures whispering urgently into concealed mics, surveillance lenses pivoting like watchful sentinels, tracking every movement. Sierra's inhale snagged in her throat, a sharp catch of breath. "What is this place exactly?" Ji-hoon's reply came quiet, almost sacred in its reverence. "This is my reality, the underbelly I've carved out." He guided her through a series of reinforced plexi portals, his hand lightly on her back, into a vast cavernous hub that served as part lair, part high-tech nerve center. Massive screens throbbed with intricate grids overlaying LA's sprawling map, zones meticulously coded. Scarlet hues marking active foes and threats, azure for territories firmly under his iron grip. Racks lined the walls with encrypted dossiers sealed in fireproof cases, while an arsenal of weapons was arrayed on a central table like ancient relics in a museum, each piece gleaming with deadly purpose. "This is my domain," he intoned solemnly, his voice echoing slightly off the concrete. "What I've painstakingly forged from nothing. What I've ravaged and destroyed to preserve against all odds." Sierra paced the room deliberately, her footsteps soft but resonant, her reflection splintered and multiplied across the myriad displays like fragments of a shattered mirror. One particular feed caught her eye, showing her own ingress into the building earlier that evening, time-stamped and meticulously filed away for posterity. "You track everything, every single detail," she breathed out in awe and horror. "Dominion requires unrelenting vigilance," he countered matter-of-factly, his tone laced with a complex blend of hubris from his achievements and quiet regret for the cost. "Every block controlled, every alias catalogued, every potential treachery anticipated and neutralized. My realm thrives because I never allow myself the luxury of insomnia's end." He halted at a fortified console in the center, unlocked a hidden vault with a retinal scan, and extracted a sleek matte tablet that hummed to life under his touch. It woke instantly, unveiling a labyrinthine maze of directories tagged with terms straight from the darkest police files or nightmares, vanishings orchestrated, payoffs discreetly logged, reprisals executed with precision. He angled the device her way, the screen's glow casting harsh shadows on his face. "You sought to know my essence, the core of who I am," he said evenly. "Behold the unvarnished answer." Sierra's heart rhythm pounded deafeningly in her ears, a drumbeat of apprehension. Why expose all this to me, of all people? Ji-hoon's gaze eclipsed even the dim lighting of the room, darker and more intense. "Because before you judge what role I might play in your life, you must fully grasp the deeds that define me, the blood on my hands." He nudged it nearer still, the radiance bathing her palms in cold light. "Peruse it all," he urged, then gentler, his voice edging toward something near beseeching. "Then choose freely if you'll remain or walk away forever." The display pulsed ominously like an open scar, raw and unhealed. Sierra navigated from dossier to dossier with growing unease, each entry icier and more chilling than the last. Coded IDs for anonymity, smeared surveillance shots capturing final moments, transactions listed like death sentences handed down in boardrooms. Her respiration filled the sterile void, the lone audible sign of humanity persisting in this cold den built on the backs of ghosts and forgotten lives. Then suddenly she stiffened in her seat, a familiar moniker, a haunting visage staring back. Tyrone Hayes, 31 years old, black, officially terminated, cause ruled as accidental overdose. But the attached snap wasn't from any official police archive. It was raw surveillance footage. His limp form crumpled in a dingy lane Sierra knew intimately from her own neighborhood walks. Her innards knotted painfully, bile rising. "Hay was from my block, right down the street," she hissed through clenched teeth. "He used to fix bikes on Pico Boulevard. always with a smile for kids. Ji-hoon remained mute, his silence a damning confession in itself. "This wasn't an overdose," she quavered, her voice trembling with a mix of rage and sorrow. Your crew, they did this." His continued quiet was answer enough, hanging heavy. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, hot and insistent, but they refused to fall, held back by sheer will. "Why bear this horror to me now?" she demanded. "To reveal the true toll of loving someone like me," he stated flatly. His words weighted. Sierra snapped the device closed with force, the sharp echo reverberating like a distant gunshot in the confined space. "You think this twisted mess is love? This is nothing but wreckage, destruction incarnate." "Perhaps it is," Ji-hoon conceded softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "But it's mine to own, to confess fully." She pivoted sharply to exit the room, her mind a storm of conflict, but she halted mid-stride at the sight of a fresh crimson streak tracing from his cuff down to his palm, seeping slowly. "You're wounded, bleeding. It's minor, nothing to concern yourself with." She disbelieved him instantly, her instincts overriding. Crossing the room in quick strides, she pulled a clean napkin from her pocket and dabbed at the injury tenderly, her touch light but firm. The mingled scent of gun oil and fresh pine soap filled the narrow space between them, intimate and disarming. Ji-hoon froze completely, not even breathing, as if unaccustomed to such care. Sierra's digits shook slightly, grazing his warm skin. "You think enduring pain makes you untouchable, a fortress," she murmured softly. "But it just isolates you further, builds higher walls." He grasped her wrist suddenly, not hard but insistent enough to draw her eyes up to meet his intense gaze. "And you," he breathed out, his voice a low murmur that sent shivers down her spine. "Make me question why I ever built those barriers in the first place." The charged air between them shattered like glass under impact. The kiss that followed wasn't planned or gentle. It was fierce. A collision of fire meeting fire, where fury and unexpected tenderness fused in the only language they both instinctively understood. Raw survival amid chaos. But the moment was short-lived. A nearby console flared to life abruptly, buzzing with frantic urgency that cut through the haze. Multiple monitors bled into scarlet alerts, alarms blaring shrilly across the digital schematics, flashing warnings like beacons. Han family incursion detected. Pier 7 West Sector, armed breach in progress. Ji-hoon's features steeled in an instant, any trace of tenderness entombed behind an impenetrable plate of resolve. "They've declared open war on my territory." Sierra retreated a step, still winded from the intensity, her lips tingling. "What are you going to do about it?" she asked, voice steady but laced with concern. He chambered his piece with an eerie, practiced poise that spoke of countless such nights, the click echoing final. "What I've always done to survive," he vowed coldly. "Conclude it decisively." And just like that, swift as a shadow vanishing at dawn, the man she'd just kissed dissolved back into the unyielding ghost once more, leaving her in the wake of his departure. The heavy hatch secured with a resounding clang that reverberated like doom through the confined space. Sierra glanced up slowly, taking in her new surroundings. Unyielding alloy barriers closing in, no windows to the outside world, a single harsh fixture droning overhead like an interrogator's lamp. This hideout was no comforting abode. It was a fortified vault designed for shades and fugitives, cold and impersonal. Ji-hoon loomed at the brink for a final moment, drizzle from the storm outside, etching glistening paths down his chiseled contours, his expression a mask of grim determination. "Remain here until I decree it safe." For how long exactly? As long as it takes to neutralize the threat, could be hours, days. She opened her mouth to protest vehemently, but he cut her off with a raised hand, his stare, ebony black, resolute and unyielding, silencing her before words could form. He stepped closer then, close enough that she could feel the quiet, radiating heat from his body cutting through the chill air. "From the very first word you spoke to me that night," he said low, his voice a gravelly rumble, "you've emerged from the shadows, become visible, and visibility dooms anyone in my ruthless sphere." Then, without further explanation, he turned and left, his footsteps fading. The portal shut with finality, the bolt engaging with a mechanical thud, and an all-encompassing quiet engulfed her like a shroud. Time itself warped in that isolation, bending and stretching unnaturally. There was no clock on the walls to mark the hours. Sierra learned to time her existence by the steady throb of her own ticker, each beat a reminder of life persisting. She discovered a plain notepad on the stark slab of a table, sterile government-issue paper, and began scrawling on it to anchor her fraying sanity. Grocery lists for normalcy, vivid recollections of better days, unsent missives to her sister filled with love and worry, and imagined conversations with him, pouring out questions and fears. Her mobile device sat idle on the makeshift nightstand, powered off as per his instructions, sealed away in the alloy crate he'd left behind like a relic. Yet in the dead of those endless nights, she'd extract it carefully, gaze longingly at the black screen as if willing it to life. Her digit would loom over the power button like a desperate prayer, temptation warring with caution. In one dim corner, a small mounted screen crackled intermittently with static, looping through surveillance feeds she didn't recognize or understand. Bustling harbors under cover of night, shadowy warehouses stacked with crates, the gritty underbelly of Los Angeles laid bare. It became a nightly ritual, staring at those grainy images, hoping against hope that one of those flickering frames would capture his silhouette, striding back toward her, safe and victorious. On the fifth night, exhaustion pulling at her, she dreamt vividly of him standing in the pouring torrent again, his palm pressing futilely through an invisible glass barrier, his voice a haunting whisper carried on the wind. "You're safer unseen, hidden from the crossfire." She awoke, gasping for air, her palms slick with cold sweat, tears tracing silent paths down her cheeks. The enveloping hush felt alive now, almost breathing, watching her every move with unseen eyes. Then, shattering the monotony, came the sound she'd been waiting for, the buzz. Her mobile ignited suddenly, vibrating hard enough to rattle the table surface. One solitary ping lit the screen. "JK. It's concluded. We emerged victorious." Her chest tightened painfully, a vice grip of emotions. Relief surged through her first, bright and disorienting like sunlight after days in darkness, but it was swiftly trailed by a wave of deep-seated dread. Because she knew all too well that triumph in his shadowy world never came clean or without cost. There were always casualties, always a price paid in blood or loyalty. Sierra eyed the reinforced hatch warily, half craving its aperture to bring him back, half fearing what state he'd return in. She breathed out a whisper into the oppressive emptiness, her voice echoing faintly off the walls. "What price did you pay this round? What did it cost you deep down?" The hush remained unyielding, offering no answers, but somewhere far beyond the thick concrete and the web of hidden cameras, she could almost hear the faint, dying echo of distant salvos dissolving into the enveloping dusk. A ghost of violence passed. The evening air reeked heavily of brine from the nearby ocean, and the sharp tang of betrayal lingering like smoke. Ji-hoon drove in stoic silence, his jaw set, the city's erratic flares fracturing across his visage in fleeting patterns. Crimson stoplights, ochre street lamps, ivory headlights. Sierra sat rigid beside him, mute but observant, noting how his knuckles whitened vice-like around the steering wheel with every passing mile, tension radiating. They came to a halt at a long-forsaken wharf on the outskirts, where the air tasted thick with salt and buried secrets, waves lapping ominously against weathered pilings. "This is where it all unfolded, where everything changed for me," he said gravely, stepping out into the pallid glow of a depot's overhead light, rain still pattering lightly. "My father fell right there in that spot." The soul-dangling bulb above them pendulated gently in the breeze, painting elongated shadows that swayed hypnotically across the cracked concrete floor, dancing like specters. Sierra followed his haunted gaze to a dark, irregular stain embedded in the slab, old but indelible, a permanent mark of tragedy. Ji-hoon's voice emerged low and stripped bare of all the protective shields she'd come to recognize, vulnerable in a way that humanized him. He was gunned down cold for defying their dues, refusing to bow to extortion. I was just 15, a boy on the cusp. I returned here after the fact, stood over his body, and swore an oath to myself. Never again would I be powerless, at anyone's mercy. He fixated on the stain as if it still whispered accusations or warnings from beyond. So I built it all from scratch. Barriers to protect, wealth to wield, terror to instill, and crimson trails to mark my path. Every piece of power I seized, every rival crushed, was just another stone added to the fortress between me and the unforgiving world outside. He turned toward her slowly, his eyes damp with unshed emotion but holding steady, unbreaking. Those barriers preserved my life through countless threats, but the span, the connection, it faltered in his words. Then a faint, rare curve touched his lips. The span is what restored my lost humanity piece by piece. Sierra's breath caught sharply in her throat, a snag of realization. And that span is you, he affirmed plainly. No embellishment needed. For a suspended instant, neither of them moved, the world narrowing to just them. The bulb's steady hum was the only sound, like a heartbeat frozen in mid-air, time itself holding its breath. Then, with deliberate care, he delved into his coat pocket, withdrawing a modest gold band, plain and matte, its value lying in deep sentimental essence rather than flashy gleam. I've erected vast dominions and interred countless enemies in my rise, Ji-hoon uttered tenderly, his voice soft like a confession. Yet I've never built a true existence, a life with meaning beyond survival. You beheld me fully that night, the core essence, not the intimidating guise everyone else sees. So I'm imploring you now, his voice cracking ever so slightly with raw emotion, abide with me through it all. Sierra's gaze glistened with a whirlwind of disbelief, lingering lament, and something perilously close to burgeoning affection. She eyed the band thoughtfully, then lifted her eyes back to his. You seek me to flank a man the entire world fears as a monster. I'm asking you to flank the man who now dreads his own shadow, his own legacy, he countered earnestly. She advanced a step, overlaying her palm gently over his outstretched one. The metal felt chill against her skin, quivering slightly with his nerves. I'll abide, she breathed out softly, but only if you commit to reshaping your realm, turning it toward light. For once, Ji-hoon's legendary poise shattered utterly, his broad frame quaking, eyelids shutting tight as if to hold back a flood. He offered no verbal reply, merely a solemn nod, like a man etching an indelible, unbreakable oath into stone. Beyond the wharf, a powerful surge boomed across the inlet, waves crashing with force. Not as a dire omen, but as a solemn testament to the pact they'd just forged. The shift in his world sparked as a subtle yet persistent insurgency, rippling out like waves from a stone dropped in still water. Pacts once inked under cover of shadow were now signed boldly in the full light of day, transparent for scrutiny. Desolate warehouses, formerly hubs of illicit dealings, morphed gradually into legitimate distribution centers buzzing with honest labor. Shadowy offshore accounts, bloated with laundered funds, were rebranded and redirected as charitable foundations aiding the underserved. Ji-hoon Kim was methodically unraveling his once vast realm fragment by painstaking fragment, dismantling the empire he'd built on fear, not through destructive blaze or violence, but through a quiet path of atonement and reform, each step a redemption. Sierra beheld the transformation unfold before her eyes like a fierce tempest, yielding reluctantly to a radiant dawn, hope breaking through clouds. Inspired, she'd launched a modest community hub in the heart of Crenshaw, dubbing it the SPAN Initiative, a gratis program teaching languages to youth from fractured homes and tough backgrounds, English basics, Korean fluency, Spanish conversational. The modest walls scented of fresh ink and budding aspiration, a sanctuary amid urban grit. When she taught the word mirai, meaning future in Korean, she couldn't help but evoke him in her mind, his journey mirroring the term's promise. Yet even the purest, most reformed palms still bore the indelible stains of lingering specters from the past. And one such ghost had a name that whispered danger. Min-ho, Ji-hoon's staunchest lieutenant, or so he'd long believed in unwavering loyalty. It began insidiously with faint whispers in the wind, strange, unfamiliar men lingering too long outside buildings, watching with predatory eyes, important contracts mysteriously vanishing from secure servers without trace. Then came the morning knock that Sierra would etch into her memory forever, a rap sharp and official. A duo in crisp ebony suits stood at the door, one flashing a silver badge that caught the light. Agent Reyes, FBI, here to discuss matters of national interest. Gukbap House's familiar dining space, once alive with the comforting spice of tunes and chatter, now echoed with the sterile, unyielding chill of a high-stakes interrogation room, tension thick as fog. Sierra sat composed across from Reyes, her hands folded neatly in her lap, jaw set resolute like steel. "We know exactly who he is, what he's capable of," Reyes stated flatly, sliding a thick sheaf of glossy photos across the scarred table. Images of Ji-hoon clasping hands with corrupt city officials in backroom deals, Ji-hoon lingering outside her modest apartment building, Ji-hoon striding confidently beside her on a public street. "What we need from you is confirmation, a solid link. Your word, one clear sentence could end this web for good." Sierra scanned the photos methodically, her expression unchanging, then lifted her gaze to meet the agent's probing stare. "And what then?" she queried softly, her tone even. "Shatter the illusion that he's truly clean, reformed." She exhaled slowly, measured and controlled. "You don't require my input for that. You have your evidence." Reyes leaned in closer, his voice dropping conspiratorially. "Don't fall into the classic trap so many women do around men like him, believing you're the special one he'll genuinely change for, the exception." Sierra held his gaze without a single flinch, her resolve unshakable. "He already has changed, profoundly, and I've seen it firsthand." The hours dragged on in that confined space, questions looping like a broken record, but eventually she walked out free and uncharged, no confessions extracted, no leverage gained. Beyond the glass doors of the federal building, the LA sun was dipping low on the horizon, hemorrhaging vibrant tangerine and deep scarlet across the sky like the metropolis itself wavered uncertainly between scorching destruction and tentative healing. Within the interrogation room, Reyes hurled the now useless dossier onto his cluttered desk in frustration, its pages scattering, void of substance. Minho's incriminating testimony had been purged from the digital record overnight. No witnesses left standing, no data trail to follow. Erased completely by unseen hands. Concurrently, across the sprawling city, Ji-hoon stood solitary on a windswept rooftop, the gale tearing viciously through his coat like claws. He'd bartered away his once absolute power for a fragile peace, and he was learning the hard way that serenity was the deadliest currency of all, more volatile than any weapon. Sierra's device hummed softly in her pocket, a new message arriving, unsigned yet unmistakably from him, the tone familiar. "We're untouchable now, but one of us might not survive this path pristine. Stay vigilant." The hidden shrine nestled discreetly amid swaying lanterns and fragrant lotus blooms, tucked in a liminal space betwixt the vibrant chaos of Koreatown and the resilient spirit of Crenshaw, a place that existed off official maps, bound only by whispered vows and shared dreams. Attendees were sparse and carefully vetted, no intrusive lenses or prying press, no outside witnesses who didn't already owe their lives or loyalty to the couple, standing solemnly beneath the warm flicker of a solitary lantern. Sierra appeared radiant in flowing ebony silk that draped elegantly, luminous against her rich hue, her locks adorned with a single pristine white lotus blossom, Ji-hoon's late mother's favorite flower, a poignant nod to heritage. He stood opposite her in a classic charcoal hanbok, restrained and traditional, yet his hands trembled visibly like a man who had just rediscovered what it truly meant to be alive, to feel deeply. The melody weaving through the air was utterly novel, a harmonious fusion. The plaintive strands of a gaiageum braided seamlessly with soft, soulful spirituals hummed low. Orient fused with Occident, not in clashing discord, but in graceful mercy, a symphony of unity. The officiant spoke sparingly, allowing space for their self-penned vows to shine. Ji-hoon began first, his English still clipped and imperfect, but laced with sincere depth that transcended language. "When I first met you, I was forged of unyielding steel, cold and impenetrable. You transformed my deepest fears into a sturdy span and crossed it boldly without a single glance backward." He paused, his eyes agleam with quiet, uncharacteristic vulnerability that touched everyone present. "You schooled me in the intricate dialect of mercy, and I found it far tougher than any strife or battle I've known." Sierra beamed warmly, her voice emerging low and steady, each syllable soaked in hard-won grace and conviction. "When I met you, I saw a man the world labeled as an untouchable phantom, But phantoms don't bleed for the worlds they've built with their own hands. Only true mortals do, with hearts that ache. You prove to me that even in the deepest shadows, there are hidden portals waiting if you listen hard enough, attune your soul. A profound hush fell over the gathering, two disparate worlds divided by history, skin tones, and accumulated scars now leaning toward each other in harmony. Inhale by inhale, they drew closer until they were no longer separate entities, but intertwined. Ji-hoon elevated her hand gently, the same matte gold band from that fateful wharf gleaming like a memory fully redeemed from darkness. "Sierra Washington," he whispered reverently, "my span, my true haven in this storm." She chuckled softly through glistening tears, lightening the moment. "And you, Ji-hoon Kim, my greatest tutor in navigating chaos." They fused in a kiss, not with the earlier blaze of passion, but with a profound tranquility that spoke of enduring peace. Beyond the shrine's walls, the drizzle resumed its rhythmic patter, as if the entire metropolis respired in relief, blessing the union. At the rear, families blended tentatively, wise Korean elders standing shoulder to shoulder with black relatives, awkward at first but gradually curving lips into smiles, unsure how to fully blend ancient customs, yet somehow making it work through shared joy. As the newlyweds pivoted to walk down the narrow aisle hand in hand, Sierra leaned close and teased lightly. "Your accent still lingers a bit rough around the edges." Ji-hoon beamed back, rare and completely unguarded, his face alight. Then, "Keep tutoring me, every day." The attendees chortled warmly, the strains of music swelling to a crescendo, and for a fleeting, perfectly suspended moment, the burdens of the past and the uncertainties of the future bowed respectfully to each other under that single canopy. One unbreakable oath, one boundless bond. By the crisp turn of autumn, Gukbap House had transcended its roots as a mere eatery, evolving into a boundless, inclusive space that welcomed all. Weeknights saw the booths crammed with a diverse tapestry, weathered longshoremen fresh from the docks, exhausted carers in scrubs, neighborhood stylists with shears in pockets, sharp-suited execs, and energetic teens redolent of post-class gym sweat and youthful dreams. Sundays transformed the sushi counter into a makeshift desk strewn with stacks of paper, colorful markers, and budget-friendly lexicons from thrift stores. Sierra had dubbed it the Span, a beacon for gratis instruction open to anyone hungry for knowledge. Youths toted in their homework assignments and burning queries. Elders shuffled in to practice polite salutes and greetings for dealing with diverse patrons in their daily lives. Even line cooks from the adjacent taco stand sneaked over during breaks to tackle Hangul basics mid-shift, laughing at their own mispronunciations. She initiated every session with the same heartfelt ritual, her voice warm and inviting. "Language is more than sounds. It's a solemn vow that says, 'I'll meet you halfway, no matter where we start.'" Then, with bold, generous strokes, she'd chalk big characters across a portable slate propped up for all to see. Sarang for love, Mayam for heart, Mul for water. Each deliberate arc lingering in the air long enough for even the shyest, most hesitant voice in the room to echo it back tentatively. The chamber responded in a beautiful cacophony of myriad inflections and accents, none deemed wrong or out of place. Mirth and camaraderie outpaced the dry rules of syntax, turning lessons into joyful communal events. Ji-hoon, ever the reformed shadow, shunned the main ingress to avoid drawing attention. Instead, he slipped in through the discreet side path, lingering at the threshold like a man hearkening to the distant tide across an invisible barrier, drawn but respectful. He'd claimed the rearmost seat quietly, palms laced together in his lap, his gaze softening in a way reserved solely for Sierra, a private tenderness. No escorts shadowed him anymore. No barked edicts disrupted the flow. He was just another learner now. At times, he'd mouth unfamiliar syllables under his breath during pauses, practicing like a mighty mountain humbly teaching itself to shift and adapt. He never intruded or dominated. The metropolis had once craved his absolute submission, but this humble haven sought only open attention and willingness. One memorable dusk, as golden light filtered through the windows, she wove a captivating story for the group. Sans specific names to protect the intimate, only vivid details that rang out like clear bells tolling truth. Picture a packed hall buzzing with life. An enigmatic man voiced a need, but went unheard by all around. Then, an unassuming server comprehended it fully, though she wasn't meant to intervene. I learned in that charged moment that valor often manifests as a small, crisp phrase spoken boldly and clearly, she explained, scripting mul juseo prominently on the slate for emphasis. And true respect sprouts and flourishes precisely where dread finally hushes, making room for understanding. Hands shot up eagerly around the room. A curious tween queried whether simple words could truly halt a brewing brawl in the streets. A wise grandmother owned up to finally apologizing to a once-shunned clerk at the corner store, bridging old divides. A bold boy from Watts recited his first full self-introduction in Korean, stumbling at first, flushing with embarrassment, but retrying with grit until he finished strong, earning applause that rang out like dawn sunlight glinting off polished metal, uplifting all. Ji-hoon beheld the scene unfold, watching Sierra as she in turn watched her students with evident pride flickering across her face like warm candlelight in the dimming room. He mused silently on the ledgers of power he'd decisively closed forever, the new portals of opportunity he'd flung open wide, reflecting how dominion had once meant imposing walls of fear and now signified open seats, inviting growth. After the session wrapped, he stacked the scattered dictionaries with slow, careful precision, as if that act of exactness could somehow translate into broader mercy and compassion. Before they all departed into the cooling evening, Sierra imparted one last poignant phrase to the group. "Duryoyo," she said clearly. "It means I'm hearing you, truly listening." She had the entire class repeat it earnestly to the person beside them, locking eyes with intention. The terms felt deceptively simple at first, then vitally necessary and finally profoundly true, resonating deep. Beyond the walls, the surrounding district seemed to inhale freer, tensions easing. Within, the span held strong and enduring, and from his spot in the back row, the man who used to own and command silence now savored the beautiful sound of other people discovering and claiming their own voices with confidence. Gukbap House shut its doors tardy that particular eve, the final echoes of a youth's infectious glee trailing off down the bustling street outside. The slates had been wiped clean of chalk dust, leaving only faint smudges, while the lingering scent of soy sauce mingled harmoniously with blooming jasmine from a potted plant in the corner. Sierra traversed the now vacant space languidly, her digits trailing lightly over the worn tables, each scratch and stain a cherished note in the symphony they had composed together through sheer will. Outside the broad pane window, Los Angeles twinkled with its myriad restless lights, a sprawling city that never truly slept, but tonight it felt protective, almost watchful over them, like a silent guardian. She perched thoughtfully on a stool by the counter, the soft glow from her phone painting her features in a warm, golden hue that softened the lines of fatigue. One fresh ping illuminated the screen, from a nameless source but carrying the familiar signature that had once instilled dread in her heart, then gradually taught her how to breathe freely again amid uncertainty. JK, eternally grateful for you making me human once more. Her heart tightened in her chest, not from lingering terror, but from a deep sense of kinship and recognition. Every scar they'd shared, every heavy silence endured, every word once hurled like sharpened knives, all of it had inexorably led here, to this simple yet profound sentence that weighed more than any fallen empires or conquered territories. Sierra curved her lips into a soft smile through the veil of tears welling up, her thumbs trembling slightly over the responsive screen. She typed back deliberately, carefully, as if each individual letter carried its own beam of light into the darkness. You always were human at your core. You just needed someone to remind you of that truth. Then, switching fluidly to Korean, the language that had once erected formidable walls between worlds and now built unbreakable bridges, she added with warmth, "Anjeonhi jayo, sleep safe." The reply lagged only a few breaths before arriving, soft as a gentle exhalation. JK. Ever the instructor, I see. Keep it coming. She chuckled quietly to herself, the sound light and freeing in the empty room, always without end. The front door opened without a creak or sound, a subtle entrance. Ji-hoon stood framed in the threshold, half enveloped in shadow, half illuminated like a living miracle emerging from the night. Rain droplets caught in his dark hair, glistening like stars. No words were exchanged at first, just the quiet, unspoken certainty of two souls who no longer needed verbal language to be fully understood. Sierra rose gracefully, bridged the floor between them in unhurried steps, and reached for his hand. His fingers were still chill from the damp eve outside, hers radiating warmth from the world she'd chosen to build and nurture. When their hands met and intertwined, the silence enveloping them wasn't a void of emptiness. It was the oldest, most primal dialect known, connection pure and wordless. Through the window pane, a soft evening wind stirred the hanging paper lanterns outside. They swayed gently in rhythm, whispering secrets in both English and Korean, a luminous vow etched in flickering light. Sierra leaned her head comfortably against his broad shoulder and whispered half to him, half to the vibrant city sprawling beyond. The strongest, most enduring language needs no spoken words at all. It requires only an open door, welcoming all who seek. Outside, the countless lights of Los Angeles blinked once in unison, as if the whole vast city had just collectively understood and affirmed the truth.